So, Greta Gerwig is making The Magician's Nephew, my favorite Narnia book, into a movie. And in order to prepare for that, and I'm really hopeful about the movie, by the way, I think Gerwig's the right person who knows how to direct young actors really well. And the story is really charming. It's a story of a boy trying to save his mother, but also a boy and a girl bonding. And I'm really hopeful about that movie. I'm going to look back at the previous Narnia films and series and try to figure out some of the mistakes that were made that should be avoided this time. So this is the beginning of the previous series of movies. This came out in 2005, a movie shot in New Zealand, big budget movie, coming right on the heels of Lord of the Rings. And in my opinion, that was one of the big downfalls. You know, Lord of the Rings, Tolkien wrote that as kind of a mythic prehistory of warfare, of clashing empires, of geographical challenges and mining and industrialization as a force for bad and kings returning to their thrones and so on. It is an epic story by design. The movies were certainly epic. And when it came to Narnia, they hired a New Zealand, a Kiwi director, and they shot the movie in New Zealand and they put this like 20-minute battle scene at the end of the movie and action scenes throughout the movie. It has a lot of the spirit of the book. I think the girl who plays Lucy, her name is Georgie Henley, was really good in this movie. And James McAvoy's Tumnus is also great. So at the beginning of the movie, it feels a little like the book, but by the end, it gets a little out of control in terms of scale. And it tries to feel kind of like a wannabe Lord of the Rings. And I think that's a big mistake that Netflix and Greta Gerwig and whoever makes the future Narnia movies after Gerwig's first, which is almost definitely going to be The Magician's Nephew, it seems like, need to avoid. They need to avoid trying to copy Lord of the Rings. Chronicles of Narnia is not Lord of the Rings. It's much more humanist in a sense, even though it's definitely not humanist in the sense that Lewis was deeply religious and he thought people needed to kind of give up their self-interest and embark on a journey which only Aslan or Jesus and God, knew the full contours of. So he's not a humanist in the sense that he thinks men should be ruling the world, right? He thinks there's some order to the world in the sense of a religious truth and beings out there. But he really starts with the characters. So his attention is all on Lucy and Edmund's, redemption in Lion, the Witch, and Wardrobe. In Magician's Nephew, it's all on Diggory and Polly and how they react to the witch who's evil, but Diggory can't tell that straight away. So really effective how Lewis stays on the characters and just depicts them so specifically. You get to know them so well. You get to know their sense of humor. It's really charming seeing the Pevensey children or Diggory and Polly kind of bicker and so on throughout the stories. They need to focus on that. They can't blow it up into Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones, which is now, they can't do what they did, what the BBC did with His Dark Materials, which is make this kind of get away from Lyra and the kids in that story, um, and make this kind of endless, sci-fi story of people in the Magisterium talking in accents like they're in the Matrix and talking about traveling, passing between worlds, and all this kind of stuff. It's just, it gets way, way out of hand and it gets way complicated. Stories like Narnia, like His Dark Materials, like Harry Potter, like Percy Jackson, A Wrinkle in Time, Series of Unfortunate Events. There's a reason the books are written from a kid's eye point of view. We don't need endless plotting of the opposing forces in this world. We can see that when they show up and when their actions affect the kids. So don't turn it into an epic battle movie. The Magician's Nephew certainly isn't. Really, none of the Narnia books are. The Magician's Nephew really isn't. After this movie came Prince Caspian and Voyage of the Dawn Treader, which I don't even own on DVD. I have seen them plenty of times. They have some redeeming qualities. I think one of them is just Georgie Henley, again, great as Lucy. And Skander Kane's talented actor as well as Edmund. They really lost the spirit of Narnia, in my opinion. Prince Caspian is basically just like a Lord of the Rings movie. It's all of this planning and plotting about taking back Narnia from the Colomans, who are this kind of Spanish, Portuguese, Italian conqueror people, like the groups that came and conquered Mexico or settled, Argentina or Brazil or whatever. and Lewis kind of brought them into Narnia through this portal between the human world and the world of Narnia. Um, there were some elements of Prince Caspian that kind of redeem it, and it is a fun movie to watch, parts of it at least. Way too much bickering between Peter and Caspian, way too much action. There's this night raid in the middle. Everybody who's seen it will know what I'm talking about. Not my favorite. A huge step down even from Lion, the Witch, and Wardrobe, which is not, the best movie ever made, but a huge step down. And then Voyage of the Dawn Treader, also a big step down. Actually more magical and colorful, and has a little more of the spirit of that book, in my opinion. Um, but it's kind of like a video game movie. So those later two movies, of Prince Caspian and Voyage of the Dawn Treader, when Netflix makes those movies, they need to get back to what Prince Caspian is about, which is really about the Pevensies. Even though it's called Prince Caspian, it's about Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy finding Narnia again, bonding over rediscovering their old castle. Lucy sees Aslan again and falls in love with him again. And the Pevensies act really selflessly. They hand over, they say, "We have not come back to reclaim our thrones and to be rulers. We've come back to Narnia to put you on it." They say that to Caspian. And of course, in the movie, they mess that all up. So it needs to be a character driven story. It needs to be a story about faith, about rediscovering faith, and and a naturalist story. Tolkien is known for siding with the woods and the creatures and the the beauty and unplanned beauty of wildlife and nature over central planning and cities and industrialization and everything that Saruman is trying to pull off in Lord of the Rings. Lewis really does that as well. Lewis is really um, pro animal, pro kind of the intrinsic life cycle and balance of nature, and he anthropomorphizes animals and trees, gives them personalities, lets them talk, and so on. And they've been sleeping basically when we meet them in Prince Caspian, and they come back alive as the Pevensies come back as Caspian, you know, returns and assumes his rightful place on the throne, and Aslan returns. The trees and the nymphs and satyrs and dwarfs and so on come out from hiding, and it's a really beautiful message. And there's also some trickery and kind of plotting in Prince Caspian, but that's the main thing that you need to get. Um, you just need to get that sense of rediscovery right, and the movie really relegated that to second fiddle, to this kind of military story, to Peter and Caspian whining at each other like high school boys. Just not fun. And Caspian's way too old in that movie, so they need to get Caspian right. It's one of my favorite books. I know a lot of people say it's the worst book or one of the worst books. It's one of my absolute favorites. Voyage of the Dawn Treader is a journey to God, basically. Um, at the end, they end up in Aslan's country, and Reepicheep stays there because that's what he's wanted all his life. It's really a beautiful story. I mean, it's a story of redemption and personal transformation for Eustace, who basically comes to God after being turned into a dragon. So his outer appearance matches his inner appearance. They really need to make sure that this story is led by the relationship between Caspian, Edmund, and Lucy, which was there in the Walden Media movie a little bit, but not as much as it should have been, and the transformation of Eustace. And they need to make it colorful and whimsical, and less about collecting swords to battle green mist like a video game and end up with these big battles and all this kind of nonsense. That doesn't need to be there. They need to spend time on the characters, on the British humor, and the professor, and all these charming little weird adventures that they have along the way. Really beautiful book. It's a lot of people's favorite book. Never been mine, Voyage of the Dawn Treader, but it is one of the most creative. It's kind of episodic. It kind of has like an Odyssey style journey home, or a reverse Odyssey, right? Because Reepicheep has never been to Aslan's country, but he feels it's its home. It's his home, so he's going off to seek admittance there, and he ends up there at the end. And then the Silver Chair is, I would say, more of a quest-based story, so it should be easier to make into a Hollywood movie or a Netflix, made for a streaming film. It has again a really great relationship between Eustace and Joe Pole, who are always kind of arguing about whose fault it is that something went wrong, but they also like each other, deep down. Um, Eustace has grown a lot since we met him at the beginning of Voyage of the Dawn Treader. Really well written story. At the end, we go into the underworld, which is what we see here on this cover, and it's really a beautiful kind of metaphor for the world above ground and the world over ground. Of course, it's hell and Eden. Not so much heaven is what Narnia is, but it does seem like there's a kind of hell below the earth. Has a lot of really funny moments, like when they discover giants are about to eat them, and all this other stuff. There's a beloved character named Puddleglum, um, and Prince Rilian, who we meet at the end, is a fun character to root for as well. We don't spend much time with him throughout the Chronicles of Narnia, but he's a great character, and you need to find a good actor to play him because his scene is really important. The Horse and His Boy is a very different kind of book. It's kind of like a Middle Eastern, Arabian, Persian kind of quest story about making it through this very rich Middle Eastern city called Tashbaan, and it's about a talking horse and people who are native to Narnia who have been kidnapped away from Narnia, returning. So it's very different. It's much more has the vibe of like it doesn't have the same plot as Lawrence of Arabia, but it has the setting of a story like that. Arabian Nights or Persian mythology, Egyptian kind of vibe. That's going to be great to see on screen. And then The Last Battle, which is the last book, is a really epic story. Again, very biblical. It's kind of about the end of days and the coming of a new world, and Aslan ushering in new people. Very theological and controversial book. It's pretty depressing. It's not like the best to reread. You know, if you need to reread one, definitely Horse and His Boy is uplifting. Prince Caspian, watching people, rediscover the world that they had left before, and helping forests reawaken, and Voyage of the Dawn Treader, which is this kind of beautiful voyage on a beautiful ship throughout the islands and then on to heaven, basically. Those are the ones to reread if you want uplifting, not Last Battle, but maybe they'll get to it eventually. This is the BBC series that they made back in the 80s, I think 88, 89, and 90. The first was Lion, the Witch, and Wardrobe. Then Prince Caspian and Voyage of the Dawn Treader, they kind of combined, and they did a really short Prince Caspian. I mean, it's barely dramatized at all. I have to say, this series, I had some affection for it when I was younger, but it always seemed really cheap the way that this series was made. Um, I do like the actors who played Peter and Susan. The actors for Lucy and Edmund, who are actually the most important of the two Pevensies and who show up in three of the books, Lion, Witch, and Wardrobe, Voyage of the Dawn Treader, and Prince Caspian. They're not great, in my opinion. And so that's kind of a huge letdown. I think this series is pretty, you can disregard it and we can hope for much better adaptations. Um, It seems that Gerwig is definitely directing Magician's Nephew first because she said when she was trying to write the script, I'm in the wood between the worlds. And then they put out a casting call for two kids, British or Irish actors who are ages 9 to 12, I think, or something. And that has to be Magician's Nephew. I guess it could be Silver Chair if you're going to start with Silver Chair, but that doesn't make any sense because this is a reboot. You're not building off of the previous movies and you don't have any continuity with them. So you wouldn't start with Silver Chair. Um, the Horse and His Boy, I guess you could do Aravis and Shasta. Aravis is older than Shasta, so it wouldn't be two 10 to 12-year-old boys. It would be like a 12-year-old boy and like a 16-year-old girl that they would be looking for. I really don't think that's what they're doing. I can't imagine starting with Horse and His Boy. It's just most of it doesn't even take place in the land of Narnia. It takes place in Archenland and Calormen and these different um, areas that are just not they're just not exactly related to Narnia. An interesting thing about this new Narnia series is it's coming out around the same time as the Harry Potter reboot on HBO, which is a really extensive. It's not building off these movies; it's going its own way. I think that's going to be really fascinating because apparently it's 8 hours they're going to take to adapt the Philosopher's Stone and then Chamber of Secrets, Prisoner of Azkaban. Those first three books, Harry Potter books, are pretty short, and the vast majority of the stuff that was in the books is in these movies. I mean, they cut some stuff that I love as a Harry Potter fan, but for the most part, it's all there. So really strange to imagine that they're doing that. I'm really hoping it's a golden age of content on these streaming services because, again, Harry Potter and Narnia were two of my absolute favorites. The one thing I really need now is for Madeline Engel, A Wrinkle in Time, her series to be rebooted. There have been a couple of terrible movie adaptations recently, including the recent one with Storm Reed and Chris Pine and so on, directed by Ava DuVernay, which was awful. I mean, it was trying to be all, diversity forward, but that wasn't even the problem. It was just poorly made and really bad. So I want a great streaming service like HBO or Apple or Netflix to pick that up and make them into great TV series or movies. But again, Narnia, and the books are really short, Narnia, it seems like they're going to be made into these 2-hour movies and that the first two are going to be written and directed by Gerwig. Now, let's talk about the order a little bit. Magician's Nephew is going to be first. And I think that's a good choice because it's my favorite book. It introduces the world of Narnia. It shows the creation of it. It's a really charming story. I think that kids will like and adults will like. If it's a period piece, they'll like whether they're American or British or Canadian or French or whatever. They will like seeing this like period piece set in London in 1899 or whatever the book was supposed to take place. I think that's a great choice. The only real logical choice next would be Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which has already been made into an animated movie in America. BBC British television series that went on for 3 hours, and a pretty recent, 20 years ago, Disney live action film that made, $700 million worldwide. So that is a pretty overexposed piece of IP. It's been adapted a lot and pretty recently for the screen and put out in theaters. There's really no other option unless you go with Horse and His Boy, which has never been adapted to television, animated films, or live action movies. I just can't see that happening though. Horse and His Boy is such an outlier, and you meet the Pevensies briefly in Horse and His Boy, and we haven't even been introduced to them in the Gerwig world if they skipped right from Magician's Nephew to that. So I can't see that happening. I think it's going to go Magician's Nephew, then Lion, the Witch, and Wardrobe, then Prince Caspian, Voyage of the Dawn Treader, Silver Chair, then we might get Horse and His Boy, and then finally the last battle. I'm sure by that time Greta Gerwig will be gone. I'm sure she'll be off to making other kind of autobiographical films about, teenagers growing up in Sacramento and 20 somethings running around New York City and after graduating from, Vassar or Barnard, which, is what a lot of her movies have been about so far. And I think that would be good. I think Gerwig would be great to make Magician's Nephew and Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which are books really focused on kids, on Polly and Diggory. So you have these young girl and young guy, and that's really what Gerwig is best at, is making movies about young girls, especially women, teenagers. Whether it's Lady Bird, Little Women, Barbie, even the character is kind of like a teenager in terms of her maturity level because she's being introduced to Earth and America for the first time. I think Gerwig's perfect for that. I do think it would be good to get some new blood in for the rest of the series. My personal favorite choices would be David Lowery, who's an American filmmaker from Texas. He's made a bunch of kind of neo westerns like Ain't Them Body Saints and so on, Old Man and the Gun. Um, some of his best movies though are Pete's Dragon and The Green Knight. Um, and then he also made a Peter Pan movie recently, which I still haven't seen. He's a really talented filmmaker, visually beautiful. You should see The Green Knight. It's a take on Sir Gawain and the Green Knight and the King Arthur mythology and everything. Really beautiful movie. I'd love to see him get a try at making Narnia. Robert Eggers, the horror filmmaker, I think could make a pretty great Silver Chair or Last Battle. Those are the kind of darker books that have a lot of almost horror kind of scenes, underground and kind of old sorcery and magic working its way. Having just seen his Nosferatu, which I liked quite a bit, I think he would do a great job there. Spike Jonze, really talented filmmaker. His Where the Wild Things Are is one of my favorite coming of age stories. Obviously, that's an American coming of age movie that's a little more quirky than Narnia ever would be, which has more of a charming traditional British sensibility. But I think Spike Jonze would be great. And I guess there are others. I mean, there's always Steven Spielberg and, you know, Robert Zemeckis and Ron Howard and the typical old hands. Um, those are some of the filmmakers I would really love to see get a hand in Narnia, and especially Spike Jonze and David Lowery. I think I would love to see a female filmmaker as well, even in addition to Gerwig, because even though Lewis was obviously a guy, he wrote young women so well. And Lucy really is kind of the protagonist of Lion, Witch, and Wardrobe, Prince Caspian, and Voyage of the Dawn Treader. And even though Shasta is the first character we meet in Horse and His Boy, it's kind of more Aravis's story by the end, and she takes a lot of the actions that lead to the outcome that happens. And then Silver Chair is very much Jill Pole's story as well, even more than Eustace's. She's the one who's given the signs by Aslan, and she has to deliver on them. So Magician's Nephew, which the real character is really Diggory, he gets the more emotional arc of trying to save his mom, even though they both witness Narnia being created and they're both sent on a mission to um, pluck an apple. You know, Diggory's the one who plucks it, and he's the one who saves his mom. And so, Magician's Nephew is really the only one that's totally driven by a guy, a young boy. The others are all main characters women. So I think getting Gerwig is a great idea, and I think finding other young female filmmakers who would love to make Narnia, preferably in Britain or Ireland or Australia, New Zealand, or whatever. American would be great as well. I think would be a great choice. So here's hoping the movies are good. I'm really looking forward to The Magician's Nephew, and you should put your thoughts in the comments. What are you hoping to see from these new Narnia movies? What do you think the previous series and movies did wrong? And who do you hope makes the films after Gerwig leaves after her first two, which I think she likely will? Thanks. Bye.